The radio transmission lasted 11 seconds. A father's voice, raw and breaking, pushed through smoke and static on emergency frequency 146.52. This is Wyatt Graves, 1847 Ridgeline Summit Road. Family of four trapped. Daughter age 6, severe asthma, out of medication, 24 hours. Fire closing in. GPS coordinates 34.1847 negative, 117.2934. Requesting immediate evacuation. Anyone, please. My baby girl can't breathe. But the voice on the radio was not the father's mind. Not the words, not the structure, not the calculated precision of every syllable designed to cut through interference and reach the exact ears that needed to hear it. The voice belonged to Wyatt Graves. The architecture behind it belonged to his wife. Meredith Graves had spent 11 minutes writing that script on the back of a cereal box with a pencil stub she found in Lily's ladybug backpack. She had chosen every word with the kind of cold surgical precision that most people associate with emergency room physicians or air traffic controllers, because Meredith had been both in a sense. 8 years as an EMT in San Bernardino County before she quit to raise her children. 8 years of arriving at scenes where seconds separated survival from brain damage, where the right information delivered in the right sequence to the right dispatcher meant the difference between a child going home and a family visiting a grave. She knew exactly what information a rescuer needed. GPS coordinates, not a street address, because nobody was coming from a mapped road. Age and weight of the patient, because medication dosages depend on body mass. Specific medical condition, not just help us, because a responder carrying the wrong equipment might as well not come at all. And she had chosen the frequency with the precision of a chess player sacrificing a pawn to capture a queen. Not 911. She had called 911 3 times in 3 days. The first time, a dispatcher named Carol had promised a helicopter within 2 hours. No helicopter came. The second time, a different dispatcher had escalated the request to the fire marshal's office. No response. The third time, Meredith had asked the dispatcher a very specific question. She asked what priority zone means. The pause on the other end told her everything. The dispatcher's voice had gone careful, the way voices go when someone is choosing between honesty and liability. It means resources are currently allocated to areas designated as critical infrastructure priority. Ma'am, I'm sure your request is in the queue. Meredith had set down the radio and sat in the smoke-filled cabin and understood with a certainty that arrives not as revelation, but as confirmation of something you already suspected. No one was coming, not because resources were stretched thin, not because the fire was too dangerous, because someone with a title and a desk and a color-coded map had looked at her family's address and decided they were not worth the fuel. That is when she stopped calling 911. Frequency 146.52 was the national simplex calling frequency for amateur radio operators. Hikers monitored it. Hunters monitored it. Boy Scout troops on camping trips monitored it because their radio operators needed practice on open frequencies. And motorcycle clubs monitored it because long-distance riders used it to coordinate meetups and warn each other about road hazards and speed traps. Meredith knew this because her husband's uncle, a man the club called Ironside, had given her a handheld radio 4 years ago and told her to keep it charged and keep it close in case the world goes sideways and the phone stopped working. He said this frequency finds family. She had written the script for Wyatt to read because his voice, deep and rough from years of construction sites and motorcycle rallies, carried better through cheap radio speakers than her higher register would. She had included "My baby girl can't breathe" because 8 years of emergency medicine had taught her that specificity triggers action, but emotion triggers urgency. A clinical description of respiratory distress makes a dispatcher type faster. A father's broken voice saying his baby cannot breathe makes a human being stand up from wherever they are sitting and move. Meredith Graves was 36 years old, brown hair tied back with a bandana that used to be white and was now gray with ash. Green eyes that carried the quality of someone who processes information faster than she speaks, which meant she often appeared calm when she was actually running 3 contingencies ahead of everyone else in the room. She stood 5'6" and weighed 132 pounds and had hands that could start an IV in a moving ambulance and splint a compound fracture in under 90 seconds. Those hands had delivered 2 babies in the field when hospital transport was not possible. Those hands had performed CPR on a construction worker who fell 40 feet onto concrete and kept his heart beating for 11 minutes until the helicopter landed. Those same hands had held her own daughter's face 100 times during asthma attacks steady as stone, while her heart hammered underneath. She had left EMS work when Lily was born. The schedule was brutal. 48-hour shifts, holidays missed the constant proximity to death that eventually either hardens you or breaks you. And Meredith had felt herself starting to harden in ways she did not want to bring home to a newborn daughter. But she never stopped thinking like an EMT. The training lived in her nervous system, automatic and permanent. Walk into any room and she had already identified the exits, the hazards, the person most likely to need help first. Grocery store, hospital, church. It did not matter. The part of her brain that assessed threat and calculated response never turned off. It just waited. For 3 days in that cabin, it had not waited. It had run at full capacity hour after hour, managing medication rationing, and air quality and hydration, in Wyatt's fracture pain, and Emmett's fear and Lily's slow deterioration. Managing all of it with the disciplined calm of a woman who knew from years of training that panic is a luxury you cannot afford when people depend on you. She handed the cereal box to Wyatt at 1:46 in the afternoon. He read it at 1:47. And 3.88 miles to the northeast, a 14-year-old boy with a burn scar on his left forearm and a dead father's topography map in his backpack heard every word. 72 hours earlier, the Graves family had driven up Ridgeline Summit Road in a Dodge pickup truck with a camper shell pulling a small utility trailer loaded with camping gear, firewood, and the kind of supplies that people who live partly off-grid bring when they are planning a long weekend in the mountains. Wyatt drove. He was 38 years old, 6'2", 217 pounds of construction worker muscle, built from years of framing houses and pouring foundations in the San Bernardino heat. Before the construction, before the Hells Angels road captain patch on his vest, before the family, he had been a combat medic in Iraq. 2 tours with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division. The kind of service that teaches you how fast a human body can fail and how little you can do about it when the equipment runs out. Meredith navigated from the passenger seat with a paper map unfolded across her lap because cell service ended at mile marker 11, and she did not trust GPS that could not update. Lily sat behind Meredith in a booster seat, clutching a stuffed unicorn named Sparkle and singing a song she had learned in 1st grade about the days of the week. Emmett sat behind Wyatt in his car seat, asleep with his mouth open the way 4-year-olds sleep, completely and without reservation. The cabin at 1847 Ridgeline Summit was a stone and timber structure that Wyatt's grandfather had built in 1963. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood stove, a bathroom with gravity-fed water from a spring uphill, a stone fireplace that could heat the entire structure in winter. The foundation was native granite. The walls were 18 inches thick at the base. The roof was corrugated steel that Wyatt had replaced 2 summers ago. It was a working man's cabin. No HOA, no manicured lawn, no property value worth calculating on a county assessor's spreadsheet. Just stone and timber and a view of the San Bernardino Mountains that made you understand why people lived up here even when the world told them they should not. The fire started on Wednesday, October 15th, 43 miles southwest at a place called Dry Creek Junction. By Thursday morning, it had consumed 6,000 acres. By Thursday afternoon, the smoke was visible from Ridgeline Summit, a brown haze sitting on the western horizon like a bruise on the skikbaar. Meredith watched it from the cabin porch Thursday evening while Wyatt grilled burgers and Lily caught fireflies in a mason jar. She had spent enough time around Wildfire as an EMT to read smoke. The color told her fuel type. Brown meant brush and grass, which burned fast but often ran out of fuel. The height told her intensity. This smoke climbed high, which meant the fire was generating its own wind system, pulling oxygen from the surrounding air like a living thing breathing. "We should leave tomorrow," she told Wyatt. He agreed. They planned to pack Friday morning and drive out by noon. But Friday morning at 6:15, Wyatt stepped off the porch to load the truck, and his right foot found a gap between 2 flagstones that the frost heave had opened overnight. His ankle rolled. The sound was like a green stick breaking. He went down hard, caught himself on the trailer hitch, and knew immediately from the angle and the grinding sensation that it was not a sprain. Meredith examined it with EMT hands. Displaced fracture of the lateral malleolus. The bone was visibly misaligned under the skin, swollen purple-black within 30 minutes. He could not bear weight. He could not work the clutch on the Dodge. And the Dodge was the only vehicle that could navigate the steep switchback road down to the highway, because you needed low-range four-wheel drive and a driver who could work three pedals while steering around hairpin turns with 1,000-foot drops. Meredith could drive the truck. She had driven it before on flat highways in daylight without smoke. But Ridgeline Summit Road was 14 miles of single-lane switchbacks carved into the mountain in 1941 by the Civilian Conservation Corps. No guardrails, no shoulders drops of 400 to 1,200 feet on the exposed side. In clear conditions, with full visibility, it was a white-knuckle drive. In smoke that reduced visibility to 50 feet with two children in the back seat and a husband screaming every time the truck bounced over a rut, it was a calculation. Meredith made the calculation. She walked to the edge of the porch and looked west. The smoke was heavier now, not just on the horizon, but in the air, drifting through the trees like fog. She estimated visibility at 200 yards and dropping. She checked the wind, southwest steady. That meant the fire was moving northeast toward them, but the rate depended on terrain and fuel load and a dozen variables she could not measure from a cabin porch. She pulled out the paper map and traced the road down. 14 miles of switchbacks. Average speed in smoke maybe 10 miles per hour. If she was aggressive, 5. If she was cautious. That meant 70 minutes to 3 hours of driving on a road where one mistake meant a 1,000-foot fall with her children in the car. Then she looked at the cabin. Granite foundation. 18-inch stone walls. Metal roof. Natural clearing around it where Wyatt's grandfather had removed trees within a 100-foot radius, not for fire safety specifically, but because he needed the timber and the sunlight for a garden. The spring-fed water system still worked. The stone fireplace alcove was essentially a bunker. Meredith made the decision that would save her family's lives. She decided to stay. Not out of paralysis, not out of fear, out of math. The cabin's survivability in a wildfire, given its stone construction and cleared perimeter, was significantly higher than the survivability of driving two children down a 14-mile cliff road in zero visibility smoke. She was choosing the option with the lowest mortality risk. And once she had made that choice, she began engineering their survival with the methodical intensity of someone who knew that hope is not a strategy. First, the breathing system. Lily's asthma was managed by a daily maintenance inhaler and a rescue inhaler for emergencies. They had brought a 7-day supply for what was supposed to be a 4-day trip, but the smoke had triggered attacks on Thursday and Friday, burning through the rescue inhaler at 3 times the normal rate. By Friday evening, the rescue inhaler was empty. The maintenance inhaler had 2 days of doses remaining. Meredith inventoried every resource. She found activated charcoal in the camping water filter system. She crushed it to powder, layered it between wet cotton bandanas, and created improvised respirator masks for all 4 of them. She hung wet blankets across every window and door opening, creating a crude but functional air filtration barrier that reduced particulate matter inside the cabin by roughly 60%. She positioned Lily in the stone fireplace alcove, the most insulated and airtight space in the structure, with a wet towel draped as a curtain across the opening. She mixed a saline solution from boiled spring water and table salt, and every 2 hours she used a medicine dropper to administer small amounts into Lily's nostrils and had her inhale steam from a pot of boiling water with the saline mixed in. It was not albuterol, it was not a bronchodilator, but it kept the airways moist and reduced the viscosity of the mucus that was slowly filling her daughter's lungs. She checked Lily's breathing rate every 15 minutes by her watch. Thursday night, 20 breaths per minute, normal for a 6-year-old. Friday morning, 24, elevated but manageable. Friday evening, 28, concerning. Saturday morning, 32. The trajectory was clear. The line went in only one direction, and at the end of that line was a place Meredith could not allow her mind to visit. Not yet. Not while there was still math to do. While Meredith engineered survival inside the cabin, the system designed to rescue her family had already written them off. Fire Marshal Garrett Thornwell sat in the San Bernardino County Emergency Operations Center at 0900 hours Saturday morning, studying a wall-mounted digital map that showed every active fire, every deployed unit, and every pending request in the county. The map used a color-coded system he had personally designed 4 years ago. Red for critical, orange for high priority, yellow for standard, and gray for category 3, which the official documentation described as defer until resources available, but which everyone in the department understood meant not worth the risk right now, and probably not worth the risk later either. Ridgeline Summit was gray. Garrett had classified it himself on Thursday evening, 12 hours after the fire started, based on a formula he had refined over 11 years as fire marshal. The formula was elegant in its simplicity. Property value divided by access difficulty multiplied by political visibility. Meadowbrook Estates, the luxury subdivision 8 miles south, scored 9.4. Average home value 2.1 million. Access via paved 4-lane highway. Residents included a county supervisor, 2 state assemblymen's donors, and the publisher of the regional newspaper. Ridgeline Summit scored 1.8. Property value essentially 0 on the tax rolls. Access via single-lane mountain road impassable during fire conditions. Residents a construction worker with a motorcycle club affiliation and no political connections whatsoever. The formula did not include a variable for children. It did not include a variable for medical conditions. It did not include a variable for the basic premise that emergency services exist to serve everyone regardless of economic status. Those variables would have complicated the math, and Garrett Thornwell had built his career on keeping the math simple. At 9:15 Saturday, he deployed 3 engine companies and 2 helicopter units to Meadowbrook Estates. Response time to Meadowbrook, 47 minutes. Response time to Ridgeline Summit, still 0, still pending, still gray. Captain Hadley, the engine company commander, assigned to the southern sector, radioed Garrett at 1000 hours with a question. Marshal, I have a request here from Ridgeline Summit. Family of 4 child with medical condition. We could divert 1 unit from Meadowbrook and reach them in approximately 90 minutes. Requesting authorization. Garrett's response was immediate. Negative, Captain. Meadowbrook is priority. Ridgeline is category 3. Maintain current deployment. Hadley paused before responding. Understood, sir, but for the record, the child is 6 years old. And for the record, Captain, every child in Meadowbrook Estates is also someone's kid. Stay on mission. The radio went silent, and Garrett Thornwell returned to his map, satisfied that the system was functioning as designed. Resources flowing to where they generated the most political and economic return. Categories clearly defined. Liability carefully managed. He did not know that Meredith Graves had already tried 911 3 times. He did not know that his dispatcher had used the phrase priority zone and that a former EMT with 8 years of experience had recognized exactly what that phrase meant. He did not know that at this very moment Meredith was writing a script on the back of a cereal box that would bypass his entire system. Reach years, he could not control and trigger a chain of events that would end. His career exposed a pattern of lethal discrimination, stretching back 4 years, and proved that the most dangerous thing to a corrupt bureaucracy is not a lawyer or a journalist or a politician. It is a mother with a dying child and nothing left to lose. At 1:58 in the afternoon on Saturday, 11 minutes after Wyatt's voice carried Meredith's words across frequency, 146.52, a 14-year-old boy named Beckett Rawlings was teaching 8 younger Boy Scouts how to read topography maps at Pine Valley Campground, 3.88 miles northeast of the Graves cabin. Beckett had a burn scar on his left forearm from a campfire accident when he was 11. It was the reason he earned his Fire Safety Merit Badge with a 98% score. The reason he taught fire behavior to younger scouts. The reason he understood at 14 that fire was not evil or malicious. It was physics. Heat rises, oxygen feeds combustion. Terrain channels wind. You respect those laws or they kill you, and there is no appeal process. His scout uniform shirt was tan with short sleeves rolled to his elbows. His cargo shorts had pockets organized like a workshop, each tool in its designated place. Compass in the northeast pocket, multi-tool on the right hip, first aid kit in the left cargo pocket. He was pointing to Ridgeline Summit on the map, explaining contour lines to Kit Overland, the 11-year-old with a gift for navigation that bordered on supernatural, when Briggs Tully raised his hand for silence. Briggs was 13, the radio operator. He wore an emergency scanner headset around his neck, the way other teenagers wore headphones as an extension of his identity. He had a talent for filtering signal from noise for hearing the one transmission that mattered in a stream of routine traffic. Emergency frequency, Briggs said. His voice had the quality it got when something on the airwaves was not routine, quiet, focused, the conversational equivalent of a hunting dog going rigid. The other scouts stopped talking. Then Wyatt Graves's voice filled the clearing. Every word Meredith had written, every piece of information she had calculated would trigger a rescue. GPS coordinates, child's age, medical condition, time remaining. My baby girl can't breathe. Silence. 9 boys frozen in place staring at a radio speaker that had just carried the sound of a father begging strangers to save his daughter because the people whose job it was to save her had decided she did not matter enough. Kit Overland grabbed the topography map and spread it flat. His usually scattered 11-year-old energy focused into something sharp and precise. His finger found the GPS coordinates in 3 seconds. Ridgeline Summit right here. That is 3.88 miles southwest of our position. Beckett was already leaning over the map measuring distance against the scale with his thumb and forefinger. His mind was calculating. Elevation change roughly 800 feet of ascent over the first 2 miles, then a descent into a saddle, then another climb. Terrain difficulty moderate to severe. Rocky with dense vegetation in the valleys but sparse granite exposure on the ridges. Fire progression based on the smoke he could see to the southwest, moving northeast at approximately half a mile per hour, in the brush faster, uphill, slower on exposed rock. Time required at double-time hiking pace with loaded packs, approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes. The same number the voice on the radio had estimated for his daughter's survival. Boys, pack up. That was Scoutmaster Ray Cosgrove, 44 years old adult leader, already standing and reaching for his backpack. His voice carried the particular urgency that meant evacuate now. Questions later, the fire is too close. We are leaving camp immediately. Everyone grab your gear. 5 minutes. But Beckett was not moving. He was staring at the map, at the dot labeled Ridgeline Summit, at the distance, at the topography. Pinrest Ridge created a natural firebreak. If you approach from the northeast granite outcropping, sparse vegetation bare rock face rising 30 feet above the surrounding forest. You could move parallel to the fire line instead of through it. Use the ridge as a shield. The geology channeled wind east to west across the ridge, meaning smoke would blow across their path rather than into it. Visibility would be reduced but breathable if they stayed on the northeast face. It was possible, dangerous but possible. The kind of possible that exists only for people who understand terrain and fire behavior well enough to find the narrow corridor between suicide and salvation. Mr. Ray Beckett said quietly, still looking at the map. We can get there. Beckett, too. Ray's voice went sharp with the authority of a man who had been responsible for children's safety for 19 years. Absolutely not. Active fire zone. We evacuate away from fire, not toward it. That is basic wilderness protocol. You know that? Briggs was still holding the radio. His hand had gone white on the casing. He said his daughter can't breathe. 6 years old. Fletcher Hollis. 13 first aid specialists. Thick black frame glasses, red hair that never stayed flat. Had his first aid kit open in his lap, already checking supplies with the meticulous intensity he brought to every medical assessment. Severe asthma without medication in heavy smoke conditions. He was calculating, his lips moving slightly. She has maybe 90 minutes before respiratory failure. Less if she has been without her inhaler for 24 hours. Maybe 70 minutes. Nash Calloway, 12 fire safety merit badge. Stocky build with perpetually messy black hair. Studying the map with the same focus his wildland firefighter grandfather had taught him. Fire is coming from west and north. If we approach from northeast, his finger traced a line along the topography. We use Pinarest Ridge as a natural firebreak. The granite exposure creates a corridor here. Sparse vegetation, minimal fuel load. We would be moving parallel to the fire line, not through it. He looked up. It is possible. This is not a discussion. Ray's voice went harder. The voice of an adult who carried the weight of liability and responsibility, and 9 sets of parents trusting him with their children. I am responsible for your safety. We evacuate now. That is final. And that was when Beckett stood up. Slowly. He looked at Ray, then at his 8 scouts, Fletcher with his first aid kit ready, Nash with his fire knowledge, Briggs with his radio, Kit with his navigation gift, Monty Drunon with his search and rescue training, Rowan Sutfield with his wilderness survival skills, Truett Lassiere with his emergency preparedness mind, Pax Reinhardt, the youngest, smallest, most determined. Then Beckett spoke. Not loud, not angry, certain with a conviction that only someone speaking from the deepest truth they know can carry. Mr. Ray, 4 years ago my father died because someone who could have helped him didn't. The clearing went silent. Every scout in Troop 47 knew Beckett's story, but he rarely spoke about it this directly. A crane operator saw a cable fraying. He had 90 seconds to hit the emergency stop and clear the workers. He did not stop the crane because the delay would cost overtime pay, and his shift supervisor would write him up. The cable snapped. The crane's load dropped. My dad and 2 other workers died instantly. His voice stayed level, but his hands were not steady. They were gripping the edge of the picnic table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. I was 10 years old when I buried my father, and I made a promise at his grave that I would never be that person. I would never know someone needed help and choose not to act because it was dangerous or inconvenient, or because someone with authority told me it was not my problem. He looked at the radio where Wyatt's voice had been. There is a 6-year-old girl 3.8 miles from where we are standing. She is dying because every adult with the power to help her decided she was not worth the risk. We can hear her father begging. We can reach her. We have the training, first aid, fire safety, wilderness survival, search and rescue, communications, orienteering, emergency preparedness, climbing. Every merit badge we ever earned. This is why we earn them, not for a patch on a sash, for this. He looked at each of his scouts. A scout is helpful. A scout is brave. A scout is loyal. We do not abandon people because it is dangerous. We do not walk away because someone in authority tells us to. I am going. Anyone who wants to come with me, grab your gear. Anyone who does not, understand completely. But I am going, on my honor. For 5 seconds, nothing moved. The smell of distant smoke hung in the air. A bird called somewhere in the canopy and went unanswered. Then Fletcher Hollis stood first, grabbed his first aid kit, walked to stand beside Beckett without saying a word. Nash Calloway stood, grabbed fire blankets and safety gear, positioned himself at Beckett's left shoulder. Briggs Tully checked his radio, battery tightened his headset strap, stood behind Beckett with his hand already near the transmit button. One by one, all 8 scouts stood and gathered their gear. No discussion, no debate. They moved as a single unit, each one finding their position in the formation like they had rehearsed this moment for years. Because in a way they had. Every camping trip, every training exercise, every merit badge class had been preparation for exactly this. Then they spoke one by one like a roll call that nobody had ordered. Fletcher. The scout oath says help other people at all times, not when it is safe, not when adults approve, at all times. Nash. My grandfather fought Wildfire for 29 years. He always said fire takes the people nobody fights for. We are fighting. Kit, the quietest scout, now firm. Everyone says I am too young to matter. Today, I proved them wrong. Monty. Search and rescue training. Step 1, locate the victim. Step 2, extract the victim. There is no step 3 that says unless it is hard. Rowan. The land provides for those who respect it. The land will protect us today. Truett, I calculated the risks. Yes, we could die. But she will die if we do not go. The math is simple. Pack's youngest voice cracking but set like stone. Everyone always treats me like I am too little. Today I am big enough. Briggs' last hand on the radio. I am calling them. They need to know help is coming. Beckett nodded. Make the call. Briggs pressed the transmit button, and his voice went out across the frequency, clear and steady and young. Ridgeline Summit, this is Scout Troop 47 Pine Valley Campground. We copied your distress call. We are 3.88 miles northeast of your position. 9 scouts, we are coming to you. Over. Inside the cabin, Meredith was checking Lily's breathing rate when Briggs's voice came through the radio. She heard the words Scout Troop and her hand stopped moving on her daughter's back. She heard 9 scouts and her mind immediately calculated. children, not adults. She heard ages 11 to 14 from the follow-up transmission, and something in her chest clenched with a fear different from the one she had been managing for 3 days. Wyatt grabbed the radio. Scout Troop. Did you say Scout Troop? How many of you? Briggs's voice came back. 9 scouts, sir, ages 11 to 14. We have first aid, fire, safety, wilderness, survival, search, and rescue training. We are equipped, we are trained, and we are coming. Ite, approximately 90 minutes. Over, Wyatt looked at Meredith. His face held the expression of a combat medic who had served 2 tours in Iraq and knew exactly how dangerous it was for children to enter an active fire zone. His mouth opened to tell them not to come. Meredith stopped him. She put her hand on his wrist and held it there. And the look she gave him was the look of a woman who had spent 3 days calculating every possible path to her daughter's survival and had watched every single one close. 911 closed. Fire marshal closed. Self-evacuation closed. Every option gone, except sitting in this cabin, counting her daughter's breaths and watching the numbers climb toward a threshold she could not think about. And now on a radio frequency she had deliberately chosen because it reached people the system could not control. 9 children had answered. She took the radio from Wyatt. Troop 47, this is Meredith Graves. I am Lily's mother. I am a former EMT. I need to talk to your first aid specialist right now, and I need your navigator to give me your planned route. Over. A pause, then a different voice, younger with the careful enunciation of someone who takes medical communication seriously. Mrs. Graves, this is Fletcher Hollis First Aid. I have a full trauma kit bag, valve mask, oral airways, and field medications. What is Lily's current status? Over. Meredith began giving Fletcher the clinical picture. Respiratory rate 38 and climbing, mild cyanosis of lips and nail beds. Productive cough with dark mucus indicating deep particulate penetration. No medication available. Estimated blood oxygen in the mid to high 80s based on clinical signs. Trending toward critical threshold within 90 minutes. She spoke to him as she would speak to a paramedic on scene. No simplification, no condescension. She listed every symptom, every intervention she had already attempted, every resource she had and did not have. And Fletcher absorbed it all with the focus of someone who understood that this information would determine whether a child lived or died. Then she called for the navigator. Kit Overland's voice came through. Mrs. Graves, we are planning to take Pinerest Ridge from the northeast, bearing 225 degrees following the granite exposure to minimize vegetation and fire risk. Total distance 3.88 miles, elevation gain 820 feet with a descent into the saddle at mile 2.1. Meredith closed her eyes and pulled the topography of Ridgeline Summit from memory. She had hiked this area for 6 years with Wyatt. She knew every ridge, every draw, every drainage channel. And she knew something Kit could not know from a map. She pressed transmit. Kit, listen carefully. Your planned route takes you through the Pinerest Saddle at mile 2.1. That saddle funnels wind from the southwest. In current conditions, the fire will push through that gap. I can see the smoke column from my window, and it is bending east at the saddle height. That means you will hit heavy smoke and possibly direct fire at exactly the point where you are most exposed and most tired from the climb. She paused to let that register. Change your route. At mile 1.4, where the granite outcrop splits into 2 fingers, take the eastern finger instead of the western one. It adds 0.4 miles but keeps you on the lee side of the ridge the entire way. The wind pushes smoke west across the ridge top, not down the eastern face. You will have cleaner air and better visibility all the way to our position. Kit's voice came back. I see the split on the map. Eastern finger mile 1.4. That brings us to Ridgeline Summit from the southeast instead of the southwest. Adds maybe 12 minutes to our ETA. Meredith looked at Lily. The little girl's chest was heaving with the effort of each breath. Her eyes were half closed. The purple unicorn shirt, the one with grass stains from playing in the yard 4 days ago, when this was still supposed to be a fun camping trip, was gray with ash. 12 minutes was 12 minutes closer to the line Meredith could not think about. But dead scouts could not save anyone. Take the eastern finger, she said. The 12 minutes keep you alive to reach us. If you take the western route and hit fire at the saddle, you will lose more than 12 minutes. You will lose everything. Roger that, Mrs. Graves. Eastern finger at mile 1.4. New ETA, 102 minutes. Meredith released the transmit button and looked at Wyatt. She had just sent 9 children into a wildfire and told them how to survive it. Wyatt's eyes were wet. He reached for her hand. "You put them on the right path," he said. "I put them on a path," she answered. "Now we find out if it is enough." The cabin was quiet except for Lily's breathing and the distant roar of fire through the trees. Emmett was asleep on a blanket in the corner, thumb in his mouth, oblivious in the way that 4-year-olds can be oblivious to the architecture of disaster unfolding around them. Meredith checked the wet blankets on the windows. Still damp, still filtering. The air flush system she had rigged flue sealed with wet rags east window cracked 2 inches, creating a slow, west-to-east flow of filtered air through the cabin was still working. She could feel the subtle current on her face. She sat beside Lily in the fireplace alcove and placed her hand on her daughter's back. The small body rose and fell with each labored breath. 38 per minute. The steam treatments were holding the mucus loose enough that Lily could still cough it up, but each coughing fit was weaker than the last. The 6-year-old's diaphragm was fatiguing. The muscles that powered her breathing were running out of strength like a marathon runner hitting the wall at mile 20. Meredith calculated the intersection point, the rate of respiratory decline versus the ETA of the scouts. 102 minutes for the scouts to arrive. Lily's breathing could sustain consciousness for approximately 80 minutes at current trajectory. That left a negative 22-minute gap. Not enough. She needed to buy time. She looked at the cabin's resources with fresh eyes. The air flush system was good but passive. She needed to reduce the load on Lily's lungs, not just filter the air, but decrease the effort required for each breath. She repositioned Lily, propping her upright at 30 degrees against folded blankets instead of lying flat. Gravity would help drain mucus from the upper airways. She mixed a stronger saline solution and created a steam tent with a blanket draped over a pot of boiling water, positioning Lily's face at the opening where the warm, moist air was thickest. The steam acted as a natural humidifier for the bronchial passages, reducing the friction of each breath. She rechecked Lily's breathing rate 15 minutes later. Still 38, not climbing. The combined interventions had stabilized the rate of decline, stretching the buffer from negative to approximately 25 minutes of margin. Narrow, dangerously narrow, but positive. It was not enough to save her daughter, but it was enough to keep her alive long enough for 9 scouts to cross 88 miles of burning mountain. That night, the night before, when Lily's breathing had been at 32 and climbing, and the smoke had turned the sunset into something that looked like the end of the world, Meredith had sat on the cabin floor in the dark with her back against the stone wall and her daughter asleep against her chest, and come closer to breaking than she had ever come in her life. She had thought about the last call she ran as an EMT. A 4-year-old boy pulled from a swimming pool, blue, lifeless. She had worked on him for 22 minutes in the back of the ambulance, compressions and ventilation and epinephrine, and the desperate mechanical rhythm of trying to restart a heart that did not want to beat. The boy died at the hospital 40 minutes later. His mother's scream was a sound Meredith still heard in dreams she never told anyone about. That boy was the reason she quit. Not the schedule, not the hardening, the boy. Because after 22 minutes of trying to bring him back and failing, she had looked at her own hands and seen them trembling for the first time in 8 years, and understood that the wall between professional detachment and personal devastation had cracked. And through that crack, she could see her own daughter's face superimposed on every small body she would ever try to save. Sitting in that dark cabin with Lily wheezing against her chest, the crack opened wider than it had ever been. She felt the trembling start in her hands and move up her arms and into her shoulders, and she pressed her face into Lily's hair and allowed herself 7 seconds of absolute terror. 7 seconds where she was not an EMT, not a strategist, not the woman with the plan, just a mother whose daughter was dying and who could not stop it. 7 seconds. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve and straightened her back against the stone wall and looked at the radio on the table and began writing the script on the cereal box. Because Meredith Graves had learned something in that ambulance with the 4-year-old boy that she had never been able to articulate until this moment. She had learned that the trembling does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. And being human does not disqualify you from saving lives. It is the reason you save them. Not this time, she whispered to the dark cabin. Not this time. She finished the script. She calculated the frequency. She planned the words that would cut through static and reach the ears of people the system could not control. And when morning came and the smoke turned the dawn into gray, she handed the cereal box to Wyatt and watched him read it into the radio and waited for someone to answer. 9 boys answered. Now sitting in the fireplace alcove with her hand on Lily's back and the radio in her other hand, listening to Briggs Tully's updates every 15 minutes, tracking 9 dots moving across a mental map of terrain, she knew by heart Meredith was the architect of this rescue. Every element flowed from decisions she had made, the frequency she had chosen, the script she had written, the route she had redirected, the medical instructions she had transmitted, the air system she had improvised. Each one a thread she had woven into a net stretched across the gap between her daughter and death. Lily stirred, her eyes open glassy and unfocused, looking up at her mother's face. "Mommy, when are the helpers coming?" Meredith brushed ash from Lily's forehead. The girl's skin was hot, not with fever, but with effort, with the work of breathing through lungs that were slowly filling with the mountain's breath. "Soon, baby. The scouts are coming," they promised. Lily's hand found her empty inhaler, the one she had been shaking every few minutes for 2 days, hoping for one more puff of the medicine that let her breathe without fighting. She shook it. Click. Empty. She shook it again. Click. Meredith gently took the inhaler from her daughter's hands and replaced it with Sparkle, the stuffed unicorn. "Hold on to Sparkle. Sparkle is brave just like you." Lily clutched the unicorn to her chest with both hands. Her next breath came in with a sound that filled the cabin, a wet, rattling wheeze audible from 10 feet away. The sound of air forcing its way through passages that were closing, narrowing, surrendering inch by inch to inflammation and mucus in the relentless invasion of wildfire smoke. Meredith counted. 1 breath, 2, 3, 38 per minute, holding steady. The combined systems were working. 25 minutes of buffer, 9 scouts at double-time pace on a route she had designed to keep them alive. The math was possible. Barely, but possible. She keyed the radio. "Troop 47, this is Meredith. Status update. Over." Briggs's voice came back, slightly winded from the pace. "Mrs. Graves, we are at mile marker 1.2 approaching the granite split. Visibility moderate, smoke present, but breathable. All 9 scouts in good condition. Heading for eastern finger per your instructions." "Over." Meredith looked at her watch. They were slightly ahead of schedule. Good pace. When you reach the eastern finger, the terrain drops into a shallow bowl at mile 2.3. Do not stop in the bowl. It will collect smoke like a bathtub. Push through to the next rise and take your water break there. Higher ground, cleaner air. Roger that. No stop in the bowl. Water break at the rise past mile 2.3. And Fletcher, Meredith added. The first aid specialist's voice came on. "Yes, ma'am. When you reach us, Lily's breathing rate will be above 40. Her lips and fingernail beds will be blue. She will look like she is dying, and you need to be ready for that. Position the bag valve mask before you kneel beside her. Have your oral airway sized and ready. 20 compressions per minute, smooth and steady, not fast. If you squeeze too fast, you will hyperinflate a 6-year-old's lungs and make everything worse. 20 per minute. Count out loud if you have to." She paused. "And Fletcher, when you see her, she is going to be scared. Talk to her while you work. Tell her your name. Tell her the scouts keep their promises. She needs to hear a calm voice more than she needs perfect technique. Do you understand?" A pause. Then Fletcher's voice steady despite everything. "I understand, Mrs. Graves. 20 per minute. Stay calm. Talk to her. We will take care of her." Meredith released the transmit button and pressed the radio against her forehead and closed her eyes. She had just prepared a 13-year-old boy to breathe for her dying daughter. She had given him the instructions she would give a paramedic arriving at a scene because that was what he was now. Not a child with a merit badge. A first responder at the most important call of his life. She opened her eyes and looked at Lily. "They are coming, baby. Just hold on a little longer." Lily did not answer. She was past answering. Her eyes were half-lidded, focused on something Meredith could not see. The way very young children look when their bodies are consuming every available resource just to maintain the most basic functions. Breathing, heartbeat, the flicker of consciousness that separates a child in crisis from a child who has crossed into a place where rescue becomes recovery. Meredith had seen that look before, in ambulances, in emergency rooms, on roadsides where the metal was still hot and the sirens were still far away. She knew what it meant and how much time it bought. Not enough, never enough, but more than zero. And more than zero was all she had been working with for 3 days. She pulled Lily closer into her lap, careful not to change the angle of her airway, and wrapped both arms around her daughter's small body. 43 pounds. She had weighed her 2 weeks ago at the pediatrician's office. A routine visit where Dr. Claire Peaton had adjusted Lily's asthma management plan and written refill prescriptions that were now sitting in a pharmacy 70 miles away, useless while the 6-year-old who needed them fought to draw each breath. Lily's fingers were still curled around Sparkle the unicorn. Her grip had loosened in the last hour, but she had not let go. Some part of her was still holding on, still present, still fighting with the stubbornness that Meredith recognized because she had seen it in the mirror every morning for 36 years. Outside, the fire roared. Inside, a mother counted breaths. And somewhere on a granite ridge between them, 9 boys were running toward the sound of both. At 2:03 in the afternoon, 9 Boy Scouts began hiking southwest at double-time pace following a route modified by a woman trapped in a burning cabin who had read the smoke and the wind and the mountain better than any satellite map could. Behind them, Scoutmaster Ray Cosgrove watched them disappear into the tree line. He stood there for exactly 7 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed the only number he could think of that might matter. The call went to the Hells Angels Inland Empire Chapter Clubhouse. Ray did not have the number memorized. He had looked it up right there, standing in a campground, watching 9 boys walk toward fire, because Beckett had mentioned once months ago that the family they were saving had connections to the motorcycle club. The phone rang 4 times. A gruff voice answered. "This is Ray Cosgrove, Scoutmaster, Troop 47. I need to get a message to your chapter president. 9 of my Boy Scouts just went into the Ridgeline Summit fire zone to rescue a family named Graves. Wyatt Graves. His uncle is someone you call Ironside. Those boys are doing what the fire marshal refused to do. And if they die out there because the system would not help, I will make sure every camera in this state knows about it." The voice on the other end went quiet for 2 seconds. Then it said, "Hold the line." Meanwhile, in the Emergency Operations Center, Garrett Thornwell was reviewing afternoon deployment schedules when his deputy handed him a note. It was a message from Captain Hadley's radio operator. A Boy Scout troop had transmitted on open frequency that they were entering the Ridgeline Summit fire zone on foot to evacuate the Graves family. Garrett read the note twice. His first thought was liability. If those children died in a fire zone he had classified as Category 3, the question would be asked. Why was the zone unserved? Why were children attempting a rescue that professional units should have handled? His second thought was optics. If those children succeeded, the question would be worse. Why did 9 Boy Scouts accomplish what the fire marshal's office refused to attempt? His third thought, and this was the thought that would define the rest of his career, was not about the children at all. It was about the cameras. News helicopters were already in the air covering the fire. If they spotted 9 kids in Scout uniforms hiking through smoke, the footage would be irresistible. And if that footage aired next to dispatch logs showing he had deployed everything to the wealthy subdivision, while a 6-year-old girl with asthma suffocated in a cabin, his career would not survive the news cycle. Garrett picked up his radio. "Get me a helicopter to Ridgeline Summit." "Priority." His deputy looked confused. "Sir, you classified Ridgeline as Category 3 this morning. I am reclassifying it. Get me a helicopter." But every helicopter was already deployed to Meadowbrook Estates, exactly where Garrett had sent them. The earliest one could be redirected was 4:15 in the afternoon, nearly 2.5 hours from now. Garrett Thornwell sat in his operations center and understood with a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with compassion and everything to do with self-preservation that 9 Boy Scouts were about to expose the one thing he had spent 11 years making sure nobody ever looked at too closely. The formula, the map, the gray zones. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from the county supervisor's office. Not about the Scouts. Not yet. But the calls about the Scouts would come when the news helicopters caught the footage. He had built a system so bureaucratically elegant that you could look directly at the evidence of bias and see nothing but efficient resource management. But 9 Boy Scouts in uniform hiking through smoke to save a child was an image that no amount of bureaucratic language could neutralize. An image that made people ask the one question Garrett had spent his entire career avoiding. Why did you not go instead? The hike began at 2:03, with Kit Overland on point topography map, in his left-hand compass, in his right calling out terrain changes every 30 seconds with the quiet precision of someone whose brain translated contour lines into physical landscape, the way a musician reads sheet music into sound. Bearing 225 degrees, elevation rising, ground-stable packed granite with loose scree at the margins. Next checkpoint, the split at the outcrop 600 meters. Nash Calloway walks second reading fire behavior with the eye his wildland firefighter grandfather had trained into him. Not just where the fire was, but where it wanted to go. Wind shifting south-southwest at the canopy level. Good for us. Pushes the main fire body west of our road. Smoke density is climbing, but we are still in breathable range. Stay below the ridgeline where the air pools cooler. Beckett walked third, setting the pace. Not too fast because they needed to arrive functional, capable of performing medical interventions and structural assessments, not doubled over and gasping. Not too slow because somewhere inside a stone cabin, a 6-year-old girl's breathing rate was climbing toward a number that meant brain cells dying by the thousand with each passing minute. He kept the pace at what scouts called a ranger walk, fast enough to cover ground, controlled enough to sustain for 90 minutes under load. His father's blue and gold neckerchief hung from his backpack strap where he had tied it before they left camp, visible to every scout behind him, a reminder of why they were here and who they were doing it for. The formation held. Fletcher monitoring physical condition from Beckett's right, Briggs behind with the radio, Monty watching the flanks for terrain hazards, Rowan reading the air, Truitt tracking supply consumption, Pax at the rear with climbing rope ready. 9 boys moving through smoke and heat with a discipline that comes not from authority, but from shared purpose. They had found their roles the way a river finds its channel, because this is what 7 years of training together looked like when the training stopped being practice and became real. At 2:19:16 minutes in, Briggs keyed the radio. Ridgeline Summit Troop 47, currently 0.9 miles from start position, approaching the granite split. All 9 scouts moving well. How is Lily over? Meredith's voice came back, strained but controlled. The voice of a woman managing a clinical emergency with one hand and a radio with the other. Respiratory rate 40. She is not responding to verbal stimulation. Blood oxygen. I am estimating high 80s based on cyanosis progression. We are close to critical. Please move fast, Beckett took the radio. Fast as we can, Mrs. Graves. We are about to hit the split. Heading for the eastern finger like you said. We will be through the bowl section in 20 minutes and into the final approach. Good. When you pass through the bowl at mile 2.3, do not slow down for anything. That section collects smoke and heat. You will feel the temperature spike and visibility will drop to maybe 30 feet. It will feel wrong. Your instinct will tell you to stop and assess. Do not stop. Push through. 60 seconds at pace gets you through the worst of it and onto the rise beyond. The air clears fast once you are past the low point. Beckett repeated the instruction back. Through the bowl, do not stop. 60 seconds to clear air. And Meredith added, yes, ma'am. You are doing something most adults would not do. I need you to keep doing it for 71 more minutes. Can you do that? Beckett looked at his 8 scouts. Fletcher adjusting his first aid kit strap. Nash scanning the fire line to the west with narrowed eyes. Kit already tracing the next segment of their route. Pax at the rear, Cordis legs in the formation, matching the pace without complaint. Yes, ma'am, 71 minutes. They hit the granite split at 2:24. The outcrop rose before them like the prow of a ship breaking through a sea of pine and manzanita. 2 ridges extending southwest from the main formation, one western, one eastern, separated by a gap of roughly 200 yards. The western finger was the direct route to Ridgeline Summit, shorter by almost half a mile, and visibly hazed with smoke that moved across its face in thick rolling sheets. The eastern finger was clear. Not clean, nothing was clean anymore, but the air on its leeward face was translucent gray instead of opaque brown. Meredith had been right. The prevailing wind pushed smoke west across the ridgetop, leaving the eastern face in a relative pocket of breathable air. Kit pointed east without hesitation. This way, Mrs. Graves's route. They turned east and began the traverse. 23 miles to the southwest, at the same moment 9 scouts made their turn onto the eastern finger. A man named Ironside stood in the parking lot of the Hells Angels Inland Empire Clubhouse, with a phone in his right hand and his prosthetic left hand resting on the fuel tank of a 1992 Harley-Davidson Fat Boy that he had ridden for 31 years. Ironside was 58 years old, 6'1", full gray beard trimmed close enough to fit inside a helmet, eagle tattoo on his right forearm from his Army Ranger days, the ink faded to blue-green the way military tattoos fade after decades of sun. His left hand was a custom prosthetic matte black titanium with articulated fingers built to grip a motorcycle throttle, designed and paid for by a VA specialist who understood that for some veterans, the motorcycle is not recreation, but survival. He had lost the hand in '87, a motorcycle accident on the Angeles Crest Highway. The surgeons could not save it. The first thing he did when the VA discharged him was ride his motorcycle home one-handed because nobody tells a Ranger he cannot ride. He had been club president for 19 years. He had led 3 missing child searches that police abandoned and found all 3 kids alive. He had organized disaster relief after the 2003 Wildfire and the 2015 North Fire, deploying club members with trucks and tools, while official agencies were still filing paperwork. 5 decades of watching institutions fail had taught him that the distance between a system that is supposed to help and a system that actually helps is often measured in leather and chrome and the willingness to show up when nobody asks you to. He had heard about the Ridgeline Summit situation from 2 sources simultaneously. Ray Cosgrove's phone call to the clubhouse and Meredith's voice on frequency 146.52, which Ironside monitored on a scanner in his garage. It was Meredith's voice that moved him, not Wyatt's distress call. That had been urgent, frightening. But it was Meredith's voice, calm and clinical and absolutely in command, directing a 13-year-old through pediatric ventilation protocols while her daughter lay dying 10 feet away, that made Ironside set down his coffee and walk to the parking lot. He recognized the sound of it, the controlled steadiness that masks active terror, the precision that emerges when a trained professional runs out of institutional support and falls back on nothing but skill and will. He had heard that sound in Kuwait, squad leaders calling for medevac while their soldiers bled out in the sand. The voice of someone holding the line alone, because the line is all that stands between the people behind them and something unthinkable. If Meredith Graves was directing a rescue from inside a burning cabin using Boy Scouts as her field team, then the situation was past the point where polite requests through proper channels would produce results. You either showed up with enough force to make the system move, or you watched it crush the people caught beneath it. But before Ironside activated the phone tree, he did something else first. He picked up the radio scanner from his workbench, switched to frequency 146.52, and called the scouts directly. At 2:34 in the afternoon, exactly 91 minutes before Lily Graves would hit the critical oxygen threshold that separated recoverable damage from permanent loss, Briggs's radio crackled with a new voice. Not Meredith, not Wyatt. Older, gravelly, controlled anger underneath every calm syllable. Scout Troop 47, this is Ironside, call sign, War Chief President of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, Inland Empire Chapter. Wyatt is my nephew. You are hiking into a wildfire to save his family. Is that correct? Over. Beckett took the radio. Yes, sir. 9 scouts. ETA, 67 minutes to Ridgeline Summit. We have medical supplies, fire safety equipment, and emergency rations. We will stabilize the family and coordinate extraction. Over. A long pause. The sound of wind, the distant rumble of engines already gathering. Son, I am 58 years old. Army Ranger, served in Kuwait, been in this club 43 years, led 3 missing child searches that police gave up on. Found all 3 kids alive. I have seen brave. I have seen loyal. I have seen brothers ride into hell for each other. But 9 kids between 11 and 14 running into a wildfire to save my family. That is the bravest thing I have witnessed in 5 decades. Another pause. Longer. Here is what is happening. I am making a call right now. Code Black. Family emergency. Minors in danger. Within 30 minutes, every brother within 50 miles will be rolling toward Ridgeline. We will bring fire trucks, medical equipment, water tankers, bulldozers for fire breaks. We will bring numbers. And when you bring my family out of that fire, we will be there to make sure they get home safe. Beckett's throat went tight. Sir, we are just trying to help. I know, son. That is why we are coming. Because if 9 boys can do what every adult authority in this county refused to do, the least we can do is back you up. War Chief out. The radio went silent. Beckett looked at his 8 scouts. They had all heard every word. Nash said quietly, "We are not alone anymore." Beckett adjusted his pack strap. "We were never alone. We had each other." He turned back to the trail and set the pace again. 3 minutes after signing off with the scouts, Ironside activated the phone tree. It worked the way it had worked for 40 years. President calls Sergeant at Arms. Sergeant calls Road Captain. Road Captain sends the group text. The text went out at 2:37 in the afternoon. 3 words, Angel Down, Ridgeline. In the Hells Angels, Angel Down means a brother is in mortal danger. It is the one call that overrides everything. Work schedules, personal conflicts, old grudges, family dinners, doctor's appointments. Nothing supersedes Angel Down. You hear it, you ride. That is not a suggestion. That is the oath. By 2:48:58, members of Inland Empire Chapter had responded with a single word, rolling. By 3:11:41, members of Riverside Chapter were on the road. By 3:29:37, members of San Bernardino Chapter were mobilizing. By 3:44:33, members of Victorville Chapter, a chapter that had not ridden with Inland Empire in 9 years, due to a blood feud that left 2 members hospitalized, heard the call. Their president, a man called Ridgeback, made the decision in 30 seconds. 9 kids between 11 and 14 are doing what we should be doing. Old beef does not matter when children are in the fire. 8 independent riders, solo bikers, not affiliated with any chapter, heard the emergency transmission on the open frequency and showed up because, as one of them said later to a reporter, "If Boy Scouts are risking their lives for a brother's family, I do not need a patch on my vest to know where I am supposed to be." Total mobilization. 177 Hells Angels plus support vehicles. The largest single chapter response in Southern California Hells Angels history. The previous record was 134 brothers for a killed member's funeral in 2019. This broke that record because 9 scouts had shamed every adult within radio range into remembering what mattered. At 3:01 in the afternoon, the troop reached the halfway point at Pinarest Ridge. The granite outcrop rose around them like a cathedral made of stone, its surfaces warm from the fire's radiant heat, but not dangerous. Not yet. The sky above was a churning canopy of gray and orange lit from beneath by the fire line burning half a mile to the west. The sound was constant now, a low, sustained roar, like standing next to a highway at rush hour, punctuated by the sharp crack of trees exploding as their sap boiled and burst their bark. "Water break," Beckett called. 2 minutes. Check your gear. Nobody sits down. If you sit your muscles cool and stiffen, and the next mile becomes twice as hard. Fletcher moved through the group with practiced efficiency. "Monty, your breathing is heavy. Slow your inhales. Deep and controlled, not short and fast. Pax, drink more water. You are not drinking enough. I can tell by your lips. Briggs, let me see your hands. Those are blisters starting. Keep them clean and do not pop them." Briggs keyed the radio while Fletcher taped his palms. "Ridgeline Summit Troop 47. Halfway point reached. ETA 39 minutes. Status update on Lily. Over." Meredith's voice came back. Thinner now. The calm still there, but stretched tight the way fabric stretches just before it tears. Respiratory rate 41. She is not responding to verbal stimulation. Blood oxygen, I am estimating high 80s based on cyanosis progression. "We are close to critical. Please move fast." Fletcher took the radio. "Mrs. Graves, this is Fletcher. I have pre-sized the oral airway and tested the bag valve mask seal 3 times during our water breaks. Rhythm is locked in. I need to know one thing. If her oxygen is in the high 80s when we arrive, how long do I have before we cross into irreversible territory?" Over. Meredith's answer came back without hesitation. "At high 80s, you have a window of roughly 15 to 20 minutes of assisted ventilation before cellular damage accelerates. But Fletcher, if you keep her at 20 per minute with a clean seal, you can hold that line. You are her margin. Do you understand?" A pause, then Fletcher's voice quieter now, carrying something that had not been there at the start of the hike. A weight. the weight of knowing exactly what depended on his hands. I understand, Mrs. Graves. I am her margin. At 3:31, a news helicopter appeared overhead. Not an evacuation helicopter. Not a rescue aircraft. A media helicopter drawn by reports trickling through emergency scanner traffic that a Boy Scout troop had entered the Ridgeline Summit fire zone on foot. The cameraman leaned out the open door and pointed his lens straight down. What he saw would be broadcast live within 10 minutes and go viral within an hour. 9 boys in Scout uniforms moving through smoke and ash with the disciplined formation of a military patrol, their faces smeared with soot, their uniforms darkened with sweat. Children doing the work of adults. Children moving toward danger while every system designed to protect them had moved away. At 3:46 in the afternoon, 8 minutes ahead of schedule with 44 minutes remaining before Lily hit the critical oxygen threshold, Beckett's troop emerged from the tree line. Meredith's improvised air flush system in the cabin had bought them that margin, stretching what should have been a 4:05 deadline to 4:30 by reducing the rate of smoke penetration into Lily's lungs. 25 extra minutes engineered from wet blankets and a cracked window in a mother's understanding of airflow dynamics. The difference between arriving too late and arriving just in time. And they saw the Graves cabin. It was still standing. Barely. The surrounding trees were burned to black skeletons, their branches gone, their trunks still smoking. Ash drifts 3 feet deep covered the clearing like gray snow. The cabin's metal roof was scorched dark and warped at the edges from radiant heat. The windows were covered with wet blankets that had dried and stiffened and turned from white to the color of old coffee. But the stone walls held. The granite foundation that Wyatt's grandfather had laid in 1963 had done exactly what granite does in a fire. It endured. Beckett cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the clearing. "Ridgeline Summit. This is Troop 47. We are here. The cabin door opened. Meredith came out first. Not Wyatt, Meredith. She walked through the door carrying Lily in her arms because Wyatt could not walk. His fractured ankle had swollen to the point where he could not stand, and Meredith had been carrying both children, one in her arms and one by the hand for the last 48 hours, whenever movement was necessary. Lily was limp. Her arms hung at her sides. The purple unicorn shirt was gray with ash. The grass stains from 4 days ago, invisible under layers of soot. Sparkle the unicorn was still clutched under one arm, held there by muscle memory, even as the rest of her body surrendered to exhaustion. Her lips were a shade of blue that Fletcher recognized immediately from his first aid training as severe cyanosis. Her chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, 43 per minute, each one producing a wet, rattling wheeze that carried across the clearing like something mechanical breaking down. Her eyes were half closed. She was conscious but barely occupying that narrow corridor between awareness and the kind of unconsciousness that does not always end. Meredith looked at 9 boys in Scout uniforms standing at the edge of her clearing, covered in ash and sweat, backpacks loaded, eyes wide but hands steady. She looked at them and her face did something that none of the Scouts expected. She did not cry. She did not collapse. She did not express relief. She went to work. Fletcher front and center. "Take her, Beckett. I need Nash to check the cabin's west wall for structural compromise." The fire got close. "Briggs, contact Ironside. Tell him we need helicopter medevac at these coordinates. Tell him to relay to any agency that will listen. Kit, I need a flat clearing at least 40 feet square for a landing zone. Mark it with something bright. Monty Wyatt is inside with a fractured ankle. He needs to be carried. Assess him and figure out how to move him. Row in the Spring is 200 yards northeast behind the boulder pile. I need clean water for Lily's airway treatments. Truett, inventory what you brought and tell me exactly what medications and equipment we have. Pack, Vito, I need you on that high rock to the south. Watch the fire line and tell me if anything changes. Go." She gave 9 orders in 12 seconds. Every scout moved instantly. Not because she was an adult and they were children, because she was a commander and they were her team, and every order was specific, logical, and aimed at keeping people alive. Fletcher ran forward, hands already reaching. "Mrs. Graves, I need to take her now. I am ready." Meredith looked at this 13-year-old boy with thick glasses and a first aid kit that looked too heavy for his frame and red hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. And she made the decision in a quarter of a second, the same way she had made decisions as an EMT. Assessing competence not by age or appearance, but by the steadiness of the hands and the focus in the eyes. Fletcher's hands were steady, his eyes were focused. She transferred Lily into his arms. The weight of her daughter leaving her grip was the hardest physical sensation Meredith had ever experienced. Harder than any trauma call, harder than any resuscitation, because this was her child and she was handing her to a boy she had never met until 90 minutes ago on a radio frequency. And everything in her maternal biology screamed to hold on tighter, to never let go, to keep this small body pressed against her chest, where she could feel every breath and count every heartbeat. But Meredith Graves was not a woman who let biology override logic. She let go because letting go gave Lily the best chance. Fletcher was rested. His arms were fresh. His training was specific to this moment. And Meredith's own arms were trembling from 3 days of carrying children and hanging blankets and boiling water and doing everything that needed doing because she was the only one who could. Fletcher laid Lily on a blanket that Rowan had spread on the ground with one fluid motion. He pulled the bag valve mask from his kit, positioned it over Lily's nose and mouth with the precision Meredith had described over the radio, checked the seal and began squeezing. 20 compressions per minute, smooth and steady, not fast. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Lily's chest rose and fell with each compression, the air entering her lungs mechanically because her own breathing muscles had been fighting for 3 days and were losing. "I need someone to time me," Fletcher said. His voice was calm, clinical, exactly the way Meredith had told him to sound. "Count for me. 1 squeeze every 3 seconds. Beckett knelt beside him. 1, 2, 3, squeeze, 1, 2, 3, squeeze. "Hey, Lily," Fletcher spoke to the half-conscious girl while his hands worked. "My name is Fletcher. I am a Boy Scout. We promised we would come get you, and Scouts do not break their promises. You are going to be okay. Just let me breathe for you for a little while. You have been working so hard. Let me take over." Lily's eyes flickered. Something moved behind them, a spark of recognition or awareness, the response of a child who hears a voice telling her she is safe and wants to believe it. Her hand moved slightly. The fingers that had been clutching an empty inhaler for 2 days, then clutching Sparkle the unicorn, now reached toward the sound of Fletcher's voice and found the fabric of his scout uniform sleeve and held on. Fletcher kept squeezing, kept talking, kept counting. Meredith watched for 15 seconds, assessing his technique with the critical eye of someone who had supervised hundreds of field interventions. His rate was correct. His pressure was appropriate for a 6-year-old's lung capacity. His seal on the mask was tight with no visible air leak. She turned and walked back into the cabin where Wyatt was sitting against the wall, his fractured ankle propped on a folded blanket, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Fletcher has her," Meredith said. "He is good. He is doing it right." Wyatt reached for her hand. "You did this. You got them here. You kept her alive long enough." Meredith sat down beside him and for the first time in 3 days allowed herself to lean against another person. Just for 10 seconds. Just long enough to feel the solidity of someone else's body beside her own. Then she straightened and picked up the radio and went back to work. At 3:52 in the afternoon, 6 minutes after the scouts reached the cabin, the sound arrived, low at first, distant, like thunder rolling across a valley, then louder, building the way a wave builds before it breaks. Except this wave was made of engines. 177 motorcycle engines converging on Ridgeline Summit from Highway 18, each one adding its voice to a chorus that shook the smoke-filled air and vibrated through the ground. Fire Marshal Garrett Thornwell was standing at the Highway 18 checkpoint when he heard it. He had driven there 20 minutes earlier, not to coordinate the rescue he had refused to authorize, to manage the optics. News cameras were filming. County supervisors were calling. When a story about Boy Scouts hiking into a wildfire started trending online, Garrett needed to be visible, positioned at the most prominent checkpoint, demonstrating responsible command presence for any lens pointed in his direction. He wore his perfectly pressed county fire marshal uniform. Polished black boots, American flag lapel pin catching the smoke-filtered afternoon light. He looked like a man in control of a crisis. He was about to discover what control actually looked like. The motorcycles came around the bend in the highway, not in chaos, not as a mob, in formation. Military-precise columns, 2 abreast, stretching back so far that Garrett could not see the end. Chrome caught sunlight, leather and denim and vests heavy with patches, Engines throttled low, a sustained rumble you felt in your teeth. Front row, Ironside on the left, prosthetic hand locked to his throttle. Reedman on the right, saddlebag bulging with evidence. Behind them, Inland Empire 58 strong. Then Riverside 41, San Bernardino 37, Victorville 33, 8 independents closing the formation. The column slowed. Engines idled but did not cut. The sound held a sustained presence that said, "We are here and we are not leaving." Garrett stood behind the barricade and felt how small one bureaucrat looks when facing 177 citizens who have decided that enough is enough. Ironside dismounted slowly, deliberately, every movement calibrated for the news cameras filming from 50 yards behind the barricade. He walked toward Garrett with the unhurried pace of a man who knows he is on the right side of this and has all the time in the world to prove it. Garrett found his voice, the bureaucratic voice, the authority voice. "Roads are closed, active fire zone, no civilian access. I am going to need you all to turn around and fire Marshal Thornwell." Ironside's voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people listen harder. "We have 9 Boy Scouts in that fire zone right now, ages 11 to 14. They are evacuating the family you classified as Category 3. They are doing your job. We are here to back them up." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I cannot authorize civilian entry into an active disaster zone. There are liability issues, safety protocols." Reedman stepped forward, pulling his tablet from the saddlebag with the smooth, practiced motion of a man who had spent 22 years as a homicide detective before turning in his badge. He turned the screen toward Garrett and toward every camera filming this exchange. October 18th, 11:50 a.m. Reedman's voice had the flat, professional tone of a detective reading evidence into the record. "You told Captain Hadley to deprioritize Ridgeline Summit. Quote, mark them Category 3. Defer until resources available." End quote. Same day, same time, you deploy 3 engine companies and 2 helicopter units to Meadowbrook Estates. Response time to Meadowbrook, 47 minutes. Response time to Ridgeline Summit, 0. Still 0. As of right now, still 0. He scrolled the screen. Dispatch logs, timestamps, resource allocation orders. Everything documented. Garrett felt his face flush. His eyes flicked to the cameras. He shifted posture, adjusted his tone, deployed the reasonable voice. "Gentlemen, I understand you are upset, but you have to understand the impossible position I am in. 40 active structure fires, limited resources. I have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. Sometimes that means, how long have you been making those decisions?" Reedman did not move, did not blink. Just asked the question the way detectives ask questions when they already have the answer in a folder. Ironside stepped closer to the barricade. "Here is what is happening, Marshal. You are going to move this barrier. We are going to extract that family. Those cameras are going to film the whole thing. And tomorrow, the whole country gets to see 177 tax-paying citizens doing what their fire marshal refused to do." Garrett tried the legal threat. He drew himself up, straightened his lapel pin. "I have authority over this checkpoint. I have relationships with the County Board of Supervisors. One phone call, and this conversation is over." Ironside gestured to Garrett's radio with his prosthetic hand. "Make the call right now, on camera. Call your supervisor and explain why you need backup to stop citizens from rescuing a 6-year-old girl you decided was not worth saving." "I will wait." 5 seconds of silence. News cameras rolling. 177 engines rumbling. Garrett's hand moved toward his radio, stopped, moved back to his side, because calling for backup meant admitting he needed protection from people doing the right thing. It meant confirming every accusation. It meant his career ending on live television instead of in a closed-door hearing. Ironside's voice dropped. Quieter, harder. "I am not asking for authorization, Marshal. I am giving you a choice. Move the barricade and pretend you are cooperating. Or keep it closed and explain to those cameras live right now why 177 tax-paying citizens have to force their way past you to save a child you decided was not worth the paperwork." He paused. "Let the silence do the work. Your choice. But choose fast, because those 9 scouts are running out of time. And unlike you, we do not calculate whether people are worth saving based on their zip code." Garrett looked at the barricade, at the cameras, at 177 faces watching him with the kind of patient intensity that said, "We will stand here all day and all night if that is what it takes." 11 years of careful math collapsed into something very simple. Move or be moved. His hands shook as he reached for his radio. Open the barricade. His deputy, a young county fire officer, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes and a growing awareness that he was witnessing something historic, hesitated. "Sir, the protocols say," I said, "open it. Now." The deputy dragged the barrier aside and 177 motorcycles rolled through. Ironside rode first, made eye contact with Garrett for 1 second. Not triumph, not anger, just acknowledgement. Then Reedman, then Inland Empire, then Riverside, then San Bernardino, then Victorville. Old feuds dissolved in a common purpose. Then 8 independents who did not need a charter to know right from wrong. Garrett stood at his empty checkpoint, barricade open. Every camera filmed it. Behind him, a reporter's voice cut through the fading engine noise. "Fire Marshal Thornwell, can you explain why civilian bikers are responding to a family you classified as low priority?" Garrett did not answer. He walked to his county vehicle, got in, and stared straight ahead at nothing. His career was not over because of a decision. It was over because of a contrast. 9 children walking toward fire, 177 bikers riding past his barrier, and 1 fire marshal standing beside an empty checkpoint with nothing left to hide behind. At 4:02 in the afternoon, the motorcycles arrived at the clearing outside the Graves cabin. Fletcher Hollis was still kneeling beside Lily. He had been manually ventilating for 16 minutes straight, 20 compressions per minute, 320 squeezes of the bag valve mask, his forearms burning, his shoulders aching, his hands starting to cramp around the bag. He had not stopped. Not once. Lily's color had improved slightly. The deep blue of her lips had lightened to something closer to purple. Her breathing rate, assisted by the bag valve mask, had stabilized. The immediate free fall toward the critical threshold had been arrested, held in suspension by the rhythmic action of a 13-year-old boy who had learned this skill from a merit badge class and perfected it on a 2-hour hike through a wildfire with a mother's voice in his ear telling him exactly what to do. When the first motorcycle engine cut through the clearing, Fletcher did not look up. He kept squeezing. His job was Lily's lungs, and nothing happening outside that circle of blanket and mask and child was his responsibility. Ironside dismounted and walked directly to where Meredith stood. She had been coordinating the entire operation from the cabin porch. Radio in one hand, watching Fletcher's technique, monitoring Briggs's communications, tracking the fire line's movement through Pax's reports from the high rock. He looked at her. She looked at him. 2 people who understood command, who recognized in each other the particular exhaustion that comes from holding everyone else together while your own foundation cracks. "Meredith, tell me what you need. Helicopter, medevac, priority 1. Lily needs hospital ventilation within 30 minutes, or the bag valve mask will not be enough. Wyatt has a displaced ankle fracture. Cannot walk. Emmett is dehydrated and scared but physically intact. I need your medic to take over from Fletcher. That boy has been breathing for my daughter for nearly 20 minutes, and he is going to hit muscle failure soon. And I need someone to relay our exact coordinates to any agency that can get a helicopter here. I have been calling 911 for 3 days and getting nothing." Ironside turned to his brothers. "Reedman, coordinate helicopter medevac. Redfield, take over ventilation from the Scout. Flintlock, get the news crews our coordinates. Broadside, full documentation. I want a record that cannot be erased." Every brother moved instantly. Redfield, the club's medic, a 45-year-old former combat medic who had served 2 tours and now ran a mobile medical clinic out of a converted RV, walked to Fletcher and knelt beside him. "Son, I am taking over. Show me your rhythm." Fletcher demonstrated 3 compressions without breaking pace. 20 per minute, smooth and steady. Seal has been tight the whole time. No air leak. Her color improved about 4 minutes in. Redfield watched the technique, and something shifted in his expression. This was not a child playing medic. This was medical-grade ventilation performed under field conditions by a teenager who had been coached by a former EMT over a radio and had not deviated from protocol for 17 straight minutes. "Perfect technique," Redfield said quietly. "You can release. I've got her." Fletcher lifted his hands from the big valve mask. His fingers were locked in the squeeze position, cramped and trembling, slow to uncurl. He sat back on his heels and looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Meredith walked to him. She did not say thank you. She said something better. Fletcher, you gave me back my daughter. Your hands did that. Then she turned back to the operation because there was still work to do, and Meredith Graves did not stop working until everyone was safe. At 4:11 in the afternoon, the medevac helicopter landed in the clearing Kit Overland had marked with bright orange scout bandanas. Redfield had stabilized Lily's blood oxygen at 94% with the bag valve mask and a portable oxygen canister he had brought from his medical RV. 94%. Barely safe but stable. The threshold for brain damage was 88. They were loading Lily onto the helicopter stretcher when Meredith noticed something. Lily's breathing pattern had changed, not the rate. The rate was controlled by the bag valve mask. The quality. Each breath produced a faint, crackling sound at the base of both lungs that had not been there 30 minutes ago. And when Meredith pressed her ear to Lily's back, she heard it clearly. The sound of fluid where air should be. Stop. Everyone froze. Meredith placed both hands on Lily's rib cage and felt the expansion pattern. The lower lobes were not inflating fully. The crackling was bilateral and Lily's neck veins were slightly more prominent than they should be. She looked at Redfield. She is developing pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. It is not just the asthma anymore. The smoke damage triggered an inflammatory response, and her lungs are leaking fluid into the air spaces. Redfield frowned. Edema in a pediatric patient would normally call for keeping her flat and increasing ventilation pressure. Meredith shook her head. If you increase pressure on damaged lungs, you force fluid deeper into the alveoli. She needs to be positioned upright 30 degrees at minimum to let gravity drain the lower lobes and reduce the bag rate from 20 to 15 per minute. Slower, deeper breaths. Give the fluid time to redistribute between compressions. That is the opposite of standard protocol, Redfield said. The field manual says, the field manual is written for healthy lungs. Meredith's voice was not sharp. It was precise. Lily's lungs have been fighting smoke for 3 days. They are inflamed, they are compromised, and they are now accumulating fluid. If we load her flat onto that helicopter and you pump her at 20 per minute for a 30-minute flight, she will arrive at the hospital with her lungs full of fluid and no way to clear them. She looked directly at him. I was an EMT for 8 years. I have managed pulmonary edema in the field 9 times, twice in children, upright position and reduced rate. That is what saves her. Redfield held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he repositioned Lily to a 30-degree incline on the stretcher, adjusted the bag valve mask rhythm to 15 per minute, and nodded. Your call, Meredith. You have been right about everything else today. They loaded Lily onto the helicopter. Meredith climbed in beside her, one hand on the bag valve mask to maintain the adjusted rhythm during flight, the other hand on Lily's forehead. Gentle, constant. The touch of a mother who had spent 3 days keeping her child alive through engineering and calculation and will, and who was not going to stop now. Wyatt was carried to the helicopter by 4 brothers. His fractured ankle splinted and stabilized. Emmett walked under his own power, holding the hand of a Riverside chapter brother who had grandchildren Emmett's age and knew how to keep a scared 4-year-old moving forward. Before they sealed the helicopter door, Meredith leaned out and found Beckett in the crowd of scouts and bikers. Your father would be proud of you, she said, and so am I. Then the door closed and the helicopter lifted off at 4:17 in the afternoon. Below, 9 Boy Scouts stood in a clearing surrounded by ash and smoke and the skeletal remains of burned forest. They were covered in soot, exhausted to the bone, their uniforms darkened with sweat and grime. Around them, 177 Hells Angels had formed a circle. Not a threatening circle, not a wall, a perimeter of protection. Chrome and leather surrounding tan and merit badges. Brothers surrounding brothers. A news helicopter circled overhead, filming the image that would define October 18th for years to come. 9 scouts at the center, 177 bikers around them. A fire marshal's empty checkpoint miles behind. A helicopter carrying a child who was supposed to die today climbing toward a hospital where a doctor would later confirm that Meredith Graves' decision to change the ventilation protocol in the final minutes before takeoff was the intervention that prevented her daughter's lungs from flooding during the flight. The doctor would use the phrase clinically decisive, But none of them knew that yet. All they knew, standing in that clearing with the fire still burning and the helicopter shrinking to a dot in the eastern sky, was that a mother had kept her daughter alive for 3 days with nothing but training and improvisation, had designed a rescue using children and radio waves and the topography of a mountain, and had diagnosed a complication in the final moments in overruled protocol and been right. Ironside stood beside Beckett and watched the helicopter disappear. "Your scout leader told me you made the decision to come here." "That's true. The whole troop made the decision together, sir. But you spoke first." Beckett touched the blue and gold neckerchief hanging from his pack. Someone had to. Ironside reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded blue bandana worn soft from decades of road miles. "This was my father's. He wore it when he rode Routes 66 and 52. He taught me that a man's worth is not measured by what he says or what he looks like. It is measured by what he does when someone needs help and nobody is watching." He handed it to Beckett. "You wear this. You earned it. And when people ask you where you got it and you tell them a Hell's Angel gave it to a Boy Scout because that scout understood something most adults forget. Every life has exactly equal value. And if you can help, you must." Beckett took the bandana with hands that were not quite steady. Around them, the fire burned. Above them, a helicopter carried a family towards safety. And between those two facts, in the space where fear meets courage and calculation meets conviction, 9 boys and 177 men stood together in ash and smoke, and the particular silence that follows the moment when ordinary people do something extraordinary and have not yet realized what it means. 3 days after the helicopter lifted off from Ridgeline Summit, Meredith Graves sat in a plastic chair in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center, watching her daughter breathe. Not the breathing of the last 3 days, not the wet, rattling wheezes that had filled the cabin like something mechanical failing, not the shallow, desperate gasps that had climbed from 20 breaths per minute to 43, while Meredith counted each one on her watch and calculated the distance between this number and the number that meant permanent damage. Normal breathing, quiet, rhythmic, the effortless rise and fall of a 6-year-old chest that no longer had to fight for every molecule of oxygen. Lily was asleep. Her purple unicorn shirt had been replaced by a hospital gown with tiny blue bears on it. An oxygen cannula sat beneath her nose, delivering supplemental air as her lungs continued healing. An IV line ran into her left hand, taped down with gauze and decorated with a smiley face sticker that a nurse named Deborah had drawn there to make it less frightening. Sparkle the unicorn was tucked under her right arm, positioned exactly where Lily had put the stuffed animal before falling asleep, which was the same position she held it in the cabin, which was the same position she held it every night at home. Because some things about children remain constant even when everything around them burns. Dr. Claire Piton, Lily's pediatric pulmonologist, sat beside Meredith. Blood oxygen on arrival was 94%, barely safe but stable. The smoke damage was significant but not permanent. The pulmonary edema you identified has resolved completely. She paused. "I need to tell you something." If Lily had been loaded flat and ventilated at the standard rate for the 30-minute flight, the fluid in her lower lobes would have progressed to acute respiratory failure. Your decision to change the protocol was the difference between full recovery and permanent lung damage. You saved your daughter's life at least 3 separate times in 72 hours. Meredith did not respond immediately. She looked at Lily, at the rise and fall of her chest, at the color in her cheeks that had returned from a blue to pink to the normal warm tone of a child who was sleeping deeply and safely. "How long until she can go home?" 6 weeks of breathing treatments. We are adjusting her asthma management plan with a new daily controller and keeping a rescue inhaler within reach at all times. She will need follow-up visits every 2 weeks initially, then monthly. But she will make a full recovery. No lasting damage. No developmental delays. She is going to live a completely normal life. Meredith closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was steady. "Thank you." Dr. Peaton stood. She paused at the door. The 13-year-old who performed manual ventilation for 20 minutes straight in an active fire zone. Fletcher was it. Yes, his technique was flawless. Medical grade. I have seen certified paramedics with 10 years of experience who could not sustain that rhythm under those conditions. Whoever trained him? Meredith almost smiled. I did. Over a radio, during a wildfire, Dr. Peetons shook her head slightly, a small involuntary gesture when reality exceeds what you thought was possible. The world needs more people like you, Mrs. Graves. Then she left, and Meredith sat in the quiet room with her sleeping daughter and allowed herself, for the first time in 4 days, to stop calculating, stop planning, stop managing contingencies and timelines and oxygen percentages. For the first time since Wednesday morning, when the smoke appeared on the horizon, she let her mind go still. It lasted about 90 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. Because Meredith Graves was not the kind of woman who survived something and then sat quietly waiting for someone else to make sure it never happened again. The first call was to Reedman. I need the dispatch logs from Garrett Thornwell's office. 4 years worth. Every emergency call, every resource allocation, every classification decision. Already pulling them, Reedman said. While you wait for official records, cross-reference the emergency call logs from scanner archives against the county's published response time reports. If Garrett was systematically deprioritizing working-class neighborhoods, the discrepancy will show it. And look for fatalities. Any death in a deprioritized area where response time exceeded 6 hours. I will have preliminary data in 48 hours. Her second call was to Ironside. She told him what she was planning. He said church meeting tomorrow night. You should be there. The brothers need to hear it from the person who figured it out. Meredith agreed. She hung up, looked at Lily, and walked to Wyatt's room. She sat on the edge of his bed and told him what she was planning. Wyatt listened. Then he said what he always said when Meredith had decided to do something that was bigger than what most people would attempt and more necessary than what most people would recognize. Whatever you need, I'm right here. 4 days after the rescue, while Meredith was building her investigation, the first counterattack came. A woman from the San Bernardino County Department of Child and Family Services arrived at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center and asked to speak with Meredith Graves regarding a welfare check on her children. The woman was polite, professional. She carried a clipboard and wore a lanyard with the county ID badge and spoke with the measured cadence of someone following a script they had rehearsed in a car before walking through the door. She said a report had been filed expressing concern about the welfare of Lily and Emmett Graves, citing exposure to hazardous conditions. The woman asked to examine the children and interview the parents separately. Wyatt's face went white. They are trying to take our kids. Meredith put her hand on his chest and pressed him back against the pillows. She looked at the woman with steady green eyes. Who filed this report? I am not authorized to disclose the identity of the reporting party. Was the report filed through the county administrator's office? The woman's eyes flickered. Meredith had spent 8 years reading faces in emergency rooms. That flicker told her everything. You can tell Nadine Hartwell, Meredith said, and the woman flinched, that I have documented every resource allocation decision Garrett Thornwell made for the last 4 years. If this welfare check was prompted by someone in county administration attempting to intimidate a witness cooperating with a federal investigation, I suggest you document that, because the FBI will be very interested in a pattern of institutional retaliation. The woman looked at Lily sleeping peacefully at the stable vital signs on the monitors at the scout drawings taped to the wall. I will note in my report that the children appear well cared for and that no further action is warranted. She left. Meredith sat on Wyatt's bed and took his hands. They are scared. They know what I am doing, and they are scared enough to use our children against us, which means we are close. They picked the wrong family. She called Reedman that evening and told him to document the welfare check. Date time the name on the woman's badge, the questions she asked the county office that dispatched her. Reedman recorded everything and added it to the file he was building. Then he told Meredith what his preliminary research had uncovered. The church meeting convened at 7:03 in the evening in the main room of the Hells Angels Inland Empire Clubhouse. 23 brothers around a long wooden table. No phones, no interruptions. Sacred time. Meredith sat at Ironside's left. She was the first woman who had ever been invited to speak at an Inland Empire church meeting. Nobody questioned it. Not because the club had suddenly reformed its traditions, but because the woman sitting in that chair had done things in the last week that commanded a respect that transcends tradition. Ironside opened. Garrett is suspended. But suspension is not accountability. It is a paid vacation while lawyers negotiate a quiet exit. We need to understand the full scope, how long this has been happening, How many families were affected? And who else enabled it? Reedman opened his laptop. I pulled 4 years of dispatch logs and cross-referenced them with emergency calls from scanner archives. Found a clear pattern. Last 4 wildfire seasons, 73 emergency calls from working class or remote areas. Average response time 8.4 hours. 17 resulted in property loss, 4 in injuries, and 1 in a death. The room went silent. September 2021. Doris Penfield, 68 years old. Cabin at Valley Oaks. Wildfire jumped containment. Fire marshal's office classified her as Category 3. Response time 11 hours. They found her body in the remains of her bedroom. At the exact same time, Garrett deployed everything to Canyon Ridge Estates, a luxury development 8 miles south. Response time there 47 minutes. 0 casualties. Her son Howard filed a wrongful death lawsuit, dismissed under qualified immunity. Reedman opened another folder. 2019. Riverside Terrace Mobile Home Park. 43 families called for evacuation. Garrett classified the entire park as Category 3. One child, Tommy Brewer, age 7, suffered permanent lung damage. His family went bankrupt trying to sue. Same result. Meredith spoke for the first time. I have been thinking about this for 3 days. Garrett Thornwell is the name everyone will remember because his face was on television. But Garrett is a symptom. He could not have operated this pattern for 4 years without institutional support. Someone above him approved the classification system. Someone handled the complaints when families objected. Someone made the lawsuits disappear. She looked around the table. I want to talk to the families. Doris Penfield's son, Tommy Brewer's parents. Every family in those 73 calls who was classified Category 3 and left behind. They are the evidence. And people only talk when they trust the person asking. The FBI can subpoena records, but they cannot make traumatized people trust them. Unless someone who understands what they went through looks them in the eye and says, I know because it happened to me too. Ironside did not put it to a vote. He did not need to. Every brother at that table understood that the woman sitting in that chair had more right to lead this than anyone else in the room. Whatever you need, Meredith, we are behind you. Over the next 11 days, Meredith Graves drove 740 miles across San Bernardino County. She visited Howard Penfield first at his apartment in Fontana. He was 63 years old, living alone, working part-time at a hardware store after losing his mother's cabin and everything in it. My name is Meredith Graves, she said. 3 weeks ago, the same fire marshal who let your mother die classified my 6-year-old daughter as not worth saving. 9 Boy Scouts hiked through a wildfire to get to us because Garrett Thornwell decided our address was not valuable enough to justify a helicopter. Your mother did not get 9 scouts. She did not get anyone. And I think about that every day. Howard Penfield stood in his doorway for a long time. Then he stepped aside and let her in. He talked for 2 hours about his mother's garden, about the phone call at 2:14 that was supposed to bring help, about the 11 hours of silence, about finding her in the ash. He gave Meredith copies of every document he had. Why should I trust you? He asked at the end. Because I am not the system, Meredith said. I am the woman who was almost the next Doris Penfield. She visited Tommy Brewer's family in Riverside. Tommy was now 10 years old, carrying a portable nebulizer in his backpack, unable to run more than 50 yards without triggering an attack from lungs scarred permanently by smoke damage he suffered at 7. His mother, Catherine, worked 2 jobs to cover medical bills the county refused to acknowledge. Catherine did not want to talk. She had talked before to reporters and lawyers who disappeared after the qualified immunity ruling. Meredith showed her photographs of Lily in the hospital, then recovering. My daughter is alive because 9 children decided she was worth saving. Your son is breathing through a machine because the same man who almost killed my daughter destroyed Tommy's lungs 4 years before he got to us. I cannot fix what happened to Tommy, but I can make sure the people who did it to him can never do it to anyone else. Catherine agreed. Over those 11 days, Meredith visited 9 families. She collected testimony documents, medical records, and 911 transcripts. When she was done, she had something no investigator or federal agent had been able to assemble. Not because they lacked the skills, but because they lacked what made those families open their doors. Trust, the specific kind of trust that exists between people who share a wound. Her 9th visit was not to a victim's family, It was to a 62-year-old man named Edgar Tillman, who had worked in the San Bernardino County Emergency Services Department for 28 years as a logistics coordinator. He had retired 6 months before the Ridgeline Summit fire. He had watched Garrett's pattern operate for a decade and documented it in private copies of memos and emails stored in a desk drawer, like a confession he had been writing for years but never found the courage to send. "I saw the news," he said quietly when he opened the door. "Those scouts did what I should have done 10 years ago." He gave Meredith everything: the memo showing Garrett's resource allocation formula, the emails from Nadine Hartwell approving the system, the complaint records, 17 in total, each one stamped with Nadine's office review, each one dismissed with the same language. Operational discretion protected by emergency response protocols. And he said the thing that Meredith had known someone somewhere in the system needed to say: "I kept records because I told myself I was documenting for eventual accountability. The truth is, I was covering my own liability while people suffered. I am 62 years old. I have my pension, my house, my retirement, and I watched 9 children do what I was too afraid to do. I do not get to call myself a good person while staying silent anymore." At 8:34 on a Tuesday evening, Special Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI's Los Angeles field office arrived at the Hells Angels clubhouse. Meredith presented the evidence. She walked Agent Mitchell through every case, every family, every data point, every document. She showed the statistical pattern that Reedman had built and the personal testimony she had collected. The human faces attached to the numbers, the names behind the gray dots on Garrett Thornwell's color-coded map. Agent Mitchell reviewed each document with increasing focus. "This fills a gap we have not been able to close for 8 months," she said. "We had the statistical pattern. We did not have the internal documentation showing intent or the victim testimony connecting individual decisions to individual harm. How did you get these families to talk?" "We approached 3 of them months ago. They refused to cooperate. I did not approach them as an investigator. I approached them as a mother whose daughter almost died the same way their loved ones did. They did not need someone to take their statement. They needed someone who understood what it feels like to call for help and hear nothing." The consequences arrived on schedule. Garrett Thornwell was formally charged with criminal negligence. The case settled before trial, with Garrett accepting a permanent ban from emergency management and a financial settlement to the Penfield and Brewer families. He moved to Nevada. Nadine Hartwell resigned under pressure, accepting a permanent ban from public service. Edgar Tillman testified to the state fire marshal, the FBI, and a congressional subcommittee. His testimony led to federal guidelines requiring that medical need and human vulnerability be primary factors in emergency classification decisions. San Bernardino County appointed a new fire marshal, Renee Garland, whose first act was implementing a protocol that required medical need to override property value in every emergency classification. The system that had failed 73 families was rebuilt. Not perfectly. Systems never change completely. But the rules changed. And rules, Meredith understood, are the scaffolding that holds a system upright when the people inside it forget why it exists. 5 days after the rescue, Wyatt and Meredith brought Lily and Emmett to the Hells Angels Inland Empire Clubhouse for dinner. The brothers had prepared a feast: burgers, hot dogs, mac and cheese, fruit salad, cookies shaped like motorcycles and scout emblems. The kind of food that children love and that adults prepare when they want to say something that words cannot quite handle. Lily sat at a long picnic table between Beckett and Fletcher, wearing her purple unicorn shirt, the one that had been washed clean of ash, but still bore the grass stains from 4 days ago, because some stains are evidence of a life lived before the fire and should not be scrubbed away. She ate a cheeseburger slowly. Nobody rushed her. Nobody counted the minutes. The sound that had defined her existence for 3 days, that wet, rattling wheeze, was gone, replaced by normal breathing, by laughter when Pax told a knock-knock joke that did not make sense, by the simple, ordinary sound of a 6-year-old being 6. Halfway through her burger, she looked at Beckett. "You are the one who promised to bring me home." "I am. You kept your promise. Scouts always do." She reached into her ladybug backpack and pulled out a drawing, crayon on white paper. 9 stick figures wearing triangle hats surrounding a smaller stick figure with yellow hair and a purple shirt. Above them, a sun. Below them, in shaky 6-year-old handwriting, "Thank you for saving me." Beckett took the drawing with hands that were not steady. "Lily, This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. You can keep it forever. I will. I promise. 2 weeks later at Pine Valley Campground, the exact spot where this had all started, the scouts and bikers gathered for a ceremony that nobody had planned, but everyone understood was necessary. Ironside stood in front of 9 scouts in full uniform, merit badge sashes gleaming in afternoon sunlight. Beckett Rawlings, Fletcher Hollis, Nash Calloway, Briggs Tully, Kit Overland, Monty Drennan, Rowan Sutfield, Truett Lassier, Pax Reinhardt. You are hereby granted honorary membership in the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club Inland Empire Chapter. You will never wear our patch because you have already got your own, and it means just as much. But you are our brothers, and if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call and we answer. That is not charity, that is family. He handed each scout a brass challenge coin. One side the Hells Angels emblem, the other side the Boy Scout emblem, engraved with the date, October 18th, 2025. The Day Courage had 9 names. Then Beckett did something nobody expected. He pulled out a hand-drawn topography map, his father's map, the one with annotations in blue pen and a coffee stain in the corner dated September 2018, folded into eighths in a crinkled plastic page protector. He walked to Lily, who was standing beside Meredith wearing a new purple unicorn shirt and pink sneakers. He knelt to her level. Lily, this map belonged to my dad. He taught me that heroes are not special people with superpowers. They are just people who help when help is needed. Your mom is a hero. She kept you alive for 3 days with nothing but her training and her brain and the kind of love that does not quit. Your dad is a hero for never giving up, and you are a hero for holding on when it hurt. He held the map out to her. When you are older, I want you to teach someone else how to read this map. That is how we make sure there are always more heroes than villains. Lily took it carefully. The way children handle things they know are precious. I will keep it safe forever. I know you will. Meredith watched her daughter hold a dead man's map and understood, in the particular way that mothers understand things, that this moment was not an ending. It was a hinge. The point where what had happened became what would happen next. February 14th, 2026, 4 months after the fire. Beckett stood on the stage at the San Bernardino Civic Center in his full scout uniform, the blue bandana Ironside had given him, now tied around his neck, accepting the Medal of Honor from the National Scout Association. 8 scouts stood beside him. In the audience, their families, their troop county officials, news cameras, and 177 Hells Angels, in polished vests and gleaming chrome, sitting in respectful silence. After the ceremony, a woman approached Beckett. Dr. Megan Callister, professor of emergency management at USC. She had been studying the rescue operation for 3 months and was developing a pilot program to create rapid response networks for situations where official systems fail. She needed an operations director with field experience, medical training, and credibility with the communities they would serve. She looked past Beckett at Meredith, who was standing 6 feet away. Graves, your name keeps coming up in every conversation I have about this program. You did in 11 days what the FBI could not do in 8 months. I am calling it Angel's Watch. Would you consider running it? Meredith did not hesitate. I will do it, on one condition. The program's first class includes the families who were failed, not just as students, as teachers. Angel's Watch launched in 7 California counties 3 months later. Meredith built it from the ground up the same way she had built the air filtration system in the cabin, with available resources, clear logic, and the absolute refusal to accept that the current situation was the best possible outcome. Enrollment in wilderness first aid courses increased 67%. Boy Scout applications in San Bernardino County tripled. Fire departments across the state implemented new protocols. And within 2 years, the program had expanded to 12 states, training over 400 young people in emergency response, and had successfully responded to 17 situations where official systems were too slow or too indifferent to act. 2 years to the day after 9 scouts ran into Wildfire, Lily Graves stood in front of 23 teenagers at an Angel's Watch orientation session. She was 8 years old, healthy lungs, Girl Scout uniform, 3 badges earned already. She carried the hand-drawn topography map in its plastic protector. My name is Lily Graves. 2 years ago, I was dying. The fire marshal said my family was not worth saving because we lived in a cabin instead of a mansion. 9 Boy Scouts hiked 3.88 miles into a wildfire because they decided I was worth saving. But before they got there, my mom kept me alive for 3 days. She built a breathing system out of blankets and charcoal. She changed the scouts' route so they would not die getting to us. She told a 13-year-old boy how to breathe for me. And when we got on the helicopter, she figured out my lungs were filling with water and changed the way they were helping me breathe. She unfolded the map. This map belonged to Beckett Rawlings' father. He told me to teach someone else how to read it. That is how we make sure there are always more heroes than villains. She walked to a girl in the front row named Maya Whitfield, 15 years old, looking uncertain. Maya, have you ever needed help and nobody came? The girl's eyes filled. She nodded. Then you understand. That is why you are here. She handed Maya the map. Learn this, then teach someone else. That is the promise. Maya took the map with shaking hands. I do not know if I am brave enough. You are. You are here. That is the first step. After the session, Lily found Beckett waiting by his car. He was 16 now, already accepted early to UC Berkeley for emergency management studies. You did great in there, he said. I learned from the best. She meant Meredith. Do you ever think about that day, Lily asked. Every single day. Me too, but not the scary parts anymore. The good parts. The part where my mom figured out everything and did not stop until we were safe. Beckett was quiet for a moment. You want to know what I think about? I think about my dad, about the crane operator who did not stop the machine. And I think maybe my dad died so that I would understand what it costs when someone chooses not to help. So when I heard your dad on the radio, there was no decision to make. Your life mattered because every life matters. Not because of some economic calculation, just because you are a person who needed help. That is the whole thing. Lily hugged him, the fierce hug of an 8-year-old who remembers what it felt like to stop breathing and knows exactly who gave her back the ability to start again. That evening, Beckett drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. A private ritual in the quiet hour before sunset. David Rawlings' headstone was simple granite, beloved father and scout leader, always helpful. He sat on the grass and pulled out the brass challenge coin. Hey, Dad, 2 years since the fire. Lily is teaching other kids now. Meredith built Angel's Watch into something real. 12 states, 400 kids trained. She is the strongest person I have ever met. His voice broke slightly. I did not save you. I was too young. But because I could not save you, I understood why I had to help save Lily. Why mercy matters more than safety. He placed the coin on the headstone for a moment, then picked it up and put it back around his neck. I love you, Dad. I am trying every day to make you proud. He stood, brushed grass from his jeans, walked back to his car as the sun dropped behind the San Bernardino Mountains. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in November, Beckett drove past Lincoln Elementary on his way to school. He saw her through the chain link fence at recess. Lily, purple unicorn backpack, pink sneakers, running full speed across the playground, laughing so hard her whole body shook, running without wheezing, without stopping. She saw him and ran to the fence. Beckett, look. She spun in a circle, arms out. I can run so fast now. Dr. Peaton says my lungs are totally healed. I am the fastest in my whole class, and I am teaching my friend Emma to read maps. The recess bell rang. Before she ran back, she said something that would stay with Beckett for the rest of his life. My teacher asked what I want to be when I grow up. I said I want to be like my mom, because she saved everybody, and she did not even have a badge. Then she was gone, running across the blacktop with her backpack bouncing and her sneakers flashing pink against gray asphalt. Just another first grader on just another Tuesday. But she was not. She was alive because a mother refused to accept that her daughter's life was worth less than a property tax assessment. Because 9 boys heard a father's voice on a radio frequency and chose to walk toward fire instead of away from it. Because 177 men on motorcycles remembered that brotherhood means showing up, especially when the system says do not bother. Beckett stood at that fence and watched her disappear into the school building. He put his hand on the challenge coin beneath his shirt. Then he got in his car and drove to school thinking about Meredith Graves standing in a burning cabin, writing a script on the back of a cereal box, that would save her daughter's life and expose a system that had been killing people for years and launch a program that would protect communities across the country. That was the real legacy, not the rescue itself. But what one woman built from the ashes of a system that failed her so that no family would ever have to hope that Boy Scouts were listening, because next time the helpers would already be there.